Basel, Germany, March 24, 1945. At 0900 hours, Private First Class Donald Wagner of the 17th Airborne Divisions, 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment shouldered the 44.4 lb M18 recoilless rifle and scanned through its M86C telescopic sight for German positions near the Rhine crossing. His loader, Private Eugene Clark, was already preparing an M307 heat round capable of penetrating 76.2 millimeters of armor at 450 meters, a range that would prove devastating against German defenders armed with Panzerfaust 60 anti-tank weapons that could only engage targets at roughly 60 meters under ideal conditions. The weapon Wagner carried represented 18 months of American engineering, developed by Edward Kroger and William Muser at a cost of less than $200 per unit, manufactured at the Dominion Engineering Works in Montreal and rushed to Europe in March 1945. The first 50 units arrived just in time for Operation Varsity, the largest single-day airborne operation in history, where they immediately proved their worth against positions once considered impregnable. Wagner's first target appeared at 420 meters, a German machine gun nest protecting a Panzerfaust team trying to work forward through the rubble. As he squeezed the trigger, the 57mm high-explosive round exited the barrel at 366 MRES, while the perforated cartridge case vented propellant gases through 400 precisely drilled holes. That lateral venting created the recoilless effect, allowing Wagner to maintain his sight picture and watch the round's impact, which obliterated the position before the German soldiers even realized they were under fire from beyond their weapon's maximum range. The first combat uses of the M18 occurred with the U.S. Army's 17th Airborne Division near Essen and with U.S. forces in the Po Valley of Italy during the spring offensive of I. 1945. Within hours of deployment, it became clear the weapon fundamentally changed infantry combat, giving American soldiers the ability to engage targets at ranges previously reserved for light artillery. German Panzerfausts suddenly seemed as obsolete as muskets, facing rifles across the Rhine. Karl Brenner of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division watched American paratroopers systematically destroy his unit's defensive positions from ranges his Panzerfausts couldn't hope to reach. A veteran of 4 years of combat from Russia to Normandy, Brenner had never felt so helpless as he watched his men fall one by one to a weapon they couldn't even identify. The relatively small backblast and minimal smoke signature made it nearly impossible to locate the American firing positions, even when German soldiers could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing overhead. By early 1945, over 2,000 M18 recoilless rifles and 800,000 rounds of ammunition were on order, a production surge that reflected American industrial capacity, with components manufactured across North America, brass cartridge cases from Connecticut, projectiles from Pennsylvania, propellant from Tennessee, all assembled in Canada by workers who took pride in producing weapons that would protect Allied soldiers while rendering German defensive tactics obsolete. The mathematics of the engagement were brutally simple. As Lieutenant James Patterson of the 513th explained to his squad during a brief respite in the fighting, the M18's effective anti-tank range of 450 meters meant American teams could set up beyond German machine gun range in the morning haze, methodically eliminate Panzerfaust positions, then displace before counter-battery fire could arrive. German soldiers, by contrast, had to cross hundreds of meters of open ground under fire just to reach the 30-60 millimeter range where their weapons were effective, assuming they survived that long. In the Po Valley, Sergeant Anthony Marinelli of the 88th Infantry Division received his first M18 on April 10. Within 2 hours, his team had destroyed 3 German strongpoints that had held up the battalion's advance for 48 hours. From a demolished church tower at 350 meters, Marinelli engaged while enemy forces below fumbled with Panzerfausts that couldn't reach half that distance. Return fire was limited to small arms that couldn't penetrate the rubble, protecting Marinelli's position. The weapon's development history reflected American pragmatism. Engineers borrowed the perforated cartridge case concept from British designs, but adapted it for mass production, using standard machining techniques and readily available materials. Unlike some German weapons that required specialized alloys and skilled craftsmen, the M18 could be produced quickly and at scale, and by April 1945, American forces were receiving rifles faster than they could train crews while German factories struggled to maintain Panzerfaust production under constant bombardment. The psychological impact of the M18 extended beyond Europe. On Okinawa, a captured Japanese officer, shaken and wide-eyed, demanded to see the new American artillery. That seemed to appear anywhere on the battlefield, and broke the traditional rules of heavy gun mobility. A reaction that captured how Axis forces perceived the weapon's disruptive effect. The technical specifications that made the M18 revolutionary were deceptively simple. It weighed 20.1 kilodor unloaded, measured 1,560 millimeters in length, and had a rifled barrel that imparted spin stabilization to the projectile, resulting in superior accuracy at extended ranges compared with the fin-stabilized rockets of the bazooka. Most importantly, the perforated cartridge case allowed propellant gases to escape laterally into an expansion chamber before venting rearward, creating equal and opposite thrust that eliminated recoil while maintaining projectile velocity. Major Robert Harrison of the 2nd Armored Division's intelligence section interviewed captured German officers in late March and found universal agreement that the M18 had invalidated German infantry anti-tank doctrine. One NCO reportedly said that issuing Panzerfaust to his men was effectively ordering them to commit suicide when facing American forces that could engage from 500. Mr. Harrison's report also noted that desertion rates rose sharply in units that had faced M18 fire, with some soldiers walking away rather than face certain death. The ammunition variety gave American forces unprecedented tactical flexibility. M306 high-explosive rounds for anti-personnel work, M307 heat rounds with roughly 76.2 minute of penetration for armor, M308 white phosphorus for smoke and incendiary effects, and post-war T-25E canister rounds with a 175 meter range for close defense. By contrast, the Panzerfaust offered only a single-shaped charge warhead with no reload capability, forcing German soldiers to choose between carrying multiple disposable tubes or accepting they had one shot before becoming defenseless. Staff Sergeant William Thompson of the 82nd Airborne Division, a veteran of Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and Holland, called the M18 the best weapon we've received in this entire war. During Operation Varsity, his team eliminated 7 German positions in 90 minutes from an average range of 350 miles, never taking return fire because the Germans couldn't identify their position. Thompson particularly appreciated the optical sight, which let him identify and prioritize targets in the hazy morning light when German soldiers using Panzerfaust iron sights could barely see 100 men in the Pacific. Theater, the lightweight 57mm cannon proved an absolute success as pocket artillery for U.S. infantry. First, used during the Battle of Okinawa on June 9, 1945, it was devastatingly effective against Japanese bunkers and cave complexes that had previously required point-blank assaults with flamethrowers and satchel charges. Dominion Engineering Works reached a production rate of 100 units per week by April 1945, enforcing quality control standards that rejected any barrel with bore variations exceeding 0.002 in any cartridge case with fewer than 398 or more than 402 perforations, and any optical sight that could not maintain 0 after 500 rounds. German industry, disrupted by bombing and material shortages, could not match those standards even if it had possessed the technology. German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding Army Group C in Italy, issued a classified assessment on April 15th stating that the M18 had rendered the Panzerfaust obsolete overnight, and that German forces were psychologically defeated by the weapon's range advantage. He reported that soldiers equipped with Panzerfausts were refusing direct orders to advance against American positions, knowing they would be killed long before reaching engagement range, and recommended immediate development of countermeasures, though he acknowledged none existed. The training differential favored the Americans. M18 crews became proficient after 4 hours of instruction covering basic operation, range estimation, and ammunition selection, while Panzerfaust crews required extensive practice in judging distances, approach routes, and firing angles, skills rendered irrelevant when American teams could engage from beyond visual range. Captain Michael O'Brien of the 3rd Infantry Division's Weapons Company calculated that a single M18 team could control approximately 700,000 square meters of terrain from one firing position compared with the theoretical 28,000. M2, a Panzerfaust team, could cover a roughly 25.1 advantage that did not account for the psychological effect of being engaged by an enemy you couldn't see or reach. O'Brien concluded that one M18 team had more long-range anti-tank capability than an entire German company equipped with Panzerfausts. Japanese Colonel Hiroshi Yamamoto, military attaché in Berlin, witnessed a captured M18 demonstration on April 2nd and immediately cabled Tokyo. American 57mm recoilless rifle invalidates all anti-tank doctrine. Engagement range 450 meter versus Panzerfaust 60 meter. Satchel charges and mines will be useless. Soldiers will die at 500 meters before reaching attacked. Détente. Recommend immediate peace negotiations before weapon deploys to Pacific Theater. The Canadian First Army received its first shipment of M18 rifles on April 20th for operations in the Netherlands. Sergeant Jean-Baptiste Tremblay of the Royal 27th Regiment used one to eliminate a German strongpoint from 300 meters. Later writing in his diary, "The Germans who massacred us when we had to assault their prepared positions now die from distances where they cannot respond. There is justice in watching them experience the helplessness we once felt." While the high-explosive warhead's performance was impressive, the M18's heat round penetrated roughly 76.2 mm of armor at 90 degrees, compared with the M6A3 rocket for the bazooka, which penetrated about 100 mm. That limitation, however, was offset by the M18's ability to engage targets accurately at roughly 4 times the bazooka's effective range. Italian Social Republic forces in the Po Valley were completely demoralized when facing M18 rifles. Sergeant Maggiore Giuseppe Rossi wrote on April 16th, "The Americans have a devil weapon that kills from beyond sight. Our Panzerfausts are useless. We cannot even see where death comes from, only hear the crack of shells before our positions explode." Mussolini promised German wonder weapons, but the Americans have the real wonders. Technical analysis of captured M18 rifles by German engineers revealed design features that seemed simple in retrospect but revolutionary in execution. Pre-engraved driving bands on projectiles reduced barrel friction by about 15%, allowing higher muzzle velocity with less propellant, and the perforated case design achieved recoilless operation without the complex Venturi systems German designers had pursued for years. The logistical footprint proved another American advantage. Each two-man team typically carried 12 rounds in modified M6 rocket bags originally designed for bazooka ammunition, providing sustained firepower, while German soldiers could carry at most 3 or 4 Panzerfausts and were often defenseless after their first engagement. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Burke of the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment reported that during the Rhine crossing, his battalion's 12 M18 teams accounted for more enemy vehicles and fortifications destroyed than all other weapons combined, engaging at average ranges of 350 mm while suffering 0 casualties among the recoilless rifle crews, a stark contrast to the nearly 100% casualty rate among German Panzerfaust teams who attempted to close to engagement range. The Soviet military observer Colonel Ivan Petrov, present at the Elbe River meeting on April 25th, immediately recognized the M18's implications for future warfare. Reporting to Moscow, intelligence officers described how Americans had solved the recoilless rifle problem with an elegant simplicity that outmatched existing German and Soviet concepts. The perforated cartridge case design, they noted, allowed propellant gases to vent laterally into an expansion chamber before exhausting rearward, producing equal and opposite thrust that nullified recoil while preserving projectile velocity. A mechanical idea that was deceptively simple, but tactically transformative. Soviet analysts warned that captured Panzerfaust stocks were effectively obsolete in the face of a weapon that engaged at several hundred meters, and urged immediate acquisition and reverse engineering to avoid permanent tactical inferiority. The reports were clinical but urgent. If Moscow did not obtain and reproduce the design quickly, future conflicts would see their formations outranged and outmatched by infantry teams that now carried portable, accurate firepower traditionally reserved for light artillery. In Italy, Brazilian Expeditionary Force units discovered the M18's unexpected versatility in mountainous terrain, where traditional anti-tank weapons and emplacements had limited fields of fire. Major Paulo Santos's account of destroying an observation post at 600 meters became an oft-cited example of the rifle's area target capability. Even when armor penetration metrics were exceeded, The combination of accuracy, velocity, and the psychological effect of being fired upon from impossible distances turned ridgelines and passes into killing grounds for defenders. Soldiers who had trained for uphill assaults suddenly found their plans invalidated by a two-man team that could emplace, observe through high-quality optics, and fire accurately from positions that traditional defenders could not even see. Santos summarized the transformation bluntly. Infantry armed with the M18 now performed the strategic functions of artillery, changing command decisions about where and how to allocate scarce resources and forcing defenders to disperse and hide rather than man obvious strongpoints. Urban combat doctrines shifted rapidly where the M18 was introduced. White phosphorus rounds, when used judiciously, created immediate smoke and incendiary effects that masked approaches, blinded defenders, and flushed troops from fortified rooms. Corporal David Miller's operations in Bremen illustrated how a single team could shape a street fight. A few M308 rounds created a rolling smokescreen that neutralized enemy observation and aimed fire. Then M306 high-explosive rounds systematically reduced positions from 300 meters, while rifle teams advanced under the cover the recoilless rifle had provided. The combined arms choreography changed, rather than costly. Close-quarter clearances with flamethrowers and satchel charges. Units could now neutralize hardened points from standoff positions, preserve assault elements for exploitation, and significantly reduce casualties among assaulting infantry. Observers from Finland and other smaller militaries took careful note of the weapon's strategic implications. Major Paavo Hetala's field notes recorded how German units, forced to carry cumbersome Panzerfausts that offered one shot apiece, abandoned them rather than lug them into positions where they became a liability. Hetala's assessment to Helsinki was stark. Tens of thousands of Panzerfausts supplied to Allied and satellite forces were tactically worthless against American teams equipped with recoilless rifles, and the choice facing smaller nations was clear: acquire the new technology or accept long-term inferiority. These pragmatic calculations were echoed by military observers from Turkey to Egypt, each drawing links between the M18's range and accuracy advantages and the new realities of battlefield control in plains, mountains, and deserts. In the Pacific Theater, the M18 rewrote assault tactics against bunker complexes and cave systems. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Robert Jackson's after-action notes from Okinawa described a repeatable pattern. Reconnaissance identified cave complexes. M308 white phosphorus rounds were fired to drive defenders to the entrances. M306 high-explosive rounds were then used to seal or collapse openings, and infantry or engineers followed to clear what remained. Jackson emphasized the life-saving aspects of these tactics. Entire companies that previously would have been ordered into kill zones could now approach under the protection of accurate indirect fire from portable systems. The optics played a crucial role. Sights produced by firms such as Bosch and Lohm incorporated coated lens treatments that reduced glare, increased contrast, and allowed effective target acquisition in low light or misty conditions, turning otherwise marginal observation posts into lethal firing positions. Allied industrial coordination amplified the weapon's battlefield effect. Dominion Engineering Works, the primary assembler, reached production rhythms that translated raw materials into combat power within days. Steel billets machined into barrels, components sourced across the continent, and finished rifles shipped within a week of receipt of raw material. That logistical tempo, coupled with rigorous quality control, barrel tolerances, precise perforation counts in the cartridge cases, and optic stability tests, ensured consistent ballistic performance and low failure rates at the front. Where German and Axis production suffered from material shortages, bomb damage, and hurried substitutions that degraded quality, the M18 program ran on an industrial assembly line, logic that turned social and economic resources into a sustained tactical advantage. The human and psychological effects of the weapon were documented in diaries, intelligence intercepts, and field reports. Polish and Dutch fighters who had faced German armor and anti-tank emplacements in earlier campaigns recorded a bitter satisfaction at seeing their former tormentors now exposed to the same helplessness. Lieutenant Stanislav Kowalski of the 2nd Corps and resistance leaders like Jan Vanderberg described a moral reversal. Technologies and tactics that once favored German assaults were stripped away, leaving defenders exposed to long-range precision that denied them the chance to reply. Prisoner interviews compiled by U.S. Army psychiatrist Major Samuel Goldberg synthesized the sentiment among captured German troops into what he called a technological defeat syndrome, a collapse in morale produced not by numbers or flanks, but by the experience of being killed at ranges where they could not retaliate. The M18's international ripple effects were immediate. Foreign military attachés cabled warnings or entreaties after observing demonstrations. Chinese nationalist efforts to copy the design highlighted that technical drawings alone were insufficient without the industrial base to match American metallurgy and heat treatment standards. Yugoslav partisans used the weapon's range to control valleys and choke points that otherwise choked their mobility. And British, Canadian, and French units requested or received rifles to bolster airborne, mountain, and urban operations. In aggregate, the M18 did more than add another weapon to the inventory. It forced a re-evaluation of defensive doctrine, logistics, and the meaning of portable firepower in modern war. And it reshaped the closing months of the conflict by enabling smaller units to exert disproportionate control across landscapes that had previously favored static defenses. With Colonel Augusto Muno Grande noting, "The Panzerfaust we considered advanced is revealed as primitive compared to American engineering." Observers concluded that Spain's German-influenced doctrine was dangerously obsolete and that alignment with America would be necessary to acquire such technology. Argentine military observer Colonel Juan Perón analyzed the M18's impact from Buenos Aires and argued that the American recoilless rifle democratized firepower, giving every infantry squad artillery capability, while Germans had to rely on suicidal courage to employ Panzerfausts at 30 meters. The technological disparity explained Allied victory as much as numerical superiority. And Argentina, he insisted, must acquire the design to maintain regional balance. Greek government forces desperately sought M18 rifles for the coming civil war. General Nikolaos Plastiras stated that the American weapon allowed infantry to dominate the battlefield from extended range. While enemies with shorter-range weapons could not respond, whoever possessed the technology would win. And Greece had to have M18 rifles or face defeat against communist opponents who would surely acquire them. Indian forces in Burma, hearing reports of the M18's effectiveness, immediately requested the weapon for use against Japanese bunkers. Brigadier Kodandra Subaya reported that the recoilless rifle would transform capabilities in jungle and mountain warfare by allowing engagements from beyond Japanese machine gun range, eliminating the need for costly frontal assaults that had decimated units and potentially saving thousands of Indian lives. Mexican Squadron 201 pilots heard of the M18's impact, and Lieutenant Jose Espinosa wrote that American infantry now possessed weapons that killed at distances their enemies could not reach, making ground combat less deadly for allies. Mexico must acquire such weapons to modernize its military, he argued, because doctrines based on older European models were now obsolete. Even Vatican military advisors noted the weapon's significance. Monsignor Giovanni Montini observed that the American recoilless rifle allowed killing at distances that removed much of the human element from combat soldiers, dying without seeing their enemy, an unsettling mechanization of warfare that paradoxically might save lives by making resistance futile and surrender more likely. The industrial ecosystem supporting M18 production extended across the Allied world. Australian steel, Canadian manufacturing, American design, and British optical expertise combined to create a weapon system no single nation could have produced alone, demonstrating that Allied cooperation went beyond battlefield tactics and into industrial integration that multiplied technological advantages. Final production. Statistics told the story of American industrial triumph. By May 1945, some 2,500 M18 rifles had been manufactured alongside roughly 1 million rounds of ammunition, while millions of Panzerfausts were reduced to scrap metal by obsolescence. American planners were already developing follow-on systems such as the T-19 with a 105 mm bore to ensure continued post-war superiority. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, observing American M18 teams at the Elbe River, told his staff that the United States had not only built a better weapon, but created a production system that could rapidly field superior arms in quantity. Their recoilless rifle rendered anti-tank rifles and captured Panzerfausts equally obsolete. And Zhukov warned that failure to learn would invite the same fate Germany had suffered. Reports from Okinawa influenced Japanese strategic calculations. Senior advisors informed Emperor Hirohito that American weapons could kill at distances Japanese forces could not match, making the planned defense of the home islands impracticable even before the atomic bombs were employed. The atomic attacks ultimately overshadowed many factors, but the M18's demonstrated battlefield effects contributed to the broader impression of overwhelming technological superiority. Post-war analyses, including the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, concluded that within weeks of deployment the M18 had invalidated German infantry anti-tank doctrine and precipitated psychological collapse in units that recognized their technological impotence. Captured documents showed that formations equipped with recoilless rifles advanced up to 3 times faster than those using conventional weapons, directly shortening campaigns and saving thousands of Allied lives. The ripple effects continued after the war. Both nationalist and communist Chinese forces sought M18 technology, and the communists eventually produced a Type 36 copy. Early versions suffered catastrophic metallurgical failures, underscoring that American manufacturing expertise and material quality were inseparable from the weapon's combat effectiveness. That lesson would shape military procurement for generations. The Korean War reaffirmed the M18's relevance, with veterans reporting its effectiveness against T-34 tanks when properly employed, even as newer U.S. recoilless rifles incorporated lessons learned and pushed continuous innovation rather than reliance on past achievements. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring later reflected that the American M18 taught a harsh lesson. In modern war, the nation with superior weapons and the industry to produce them defeats the nation that relies on bravery alone, because courage cannot overcome physics when an enemy can kill from beyond the ability to respond. Swiss military historian Hans Delbruck analyzed the disparity in 1946 and concluded that the M18 versus Panzerfaust comparison perfectly encapsulated the American approach, using technological superiority and industrial might to minimize friendly casualties while maximizing enemy losses, transforming warfare from individual heroism to the systematic application of overwhelming firepower from safe distances. The M18's design principles endured. The fundamental idea of a lightweight, rifled recoilless launcher with a perforated cartridge case influenced post-war weapons such as the Carl Gustaf, which continued to serve NATO forces for decades. The last documented use of a World War II-era Panzerfaust occurred as a museum relic in Syria in 2015, a reminder that desperate improvisations become historical curiosities while sound engineering transcends generations. Former Panzerfaust designer Hinrich Langweiler, later employed by the U.S. Army to study captured systems, reportedly admitted, "We spent years trying to push the Panzerfaust to 100 meters while you were already shooting at 500. We were solving the wrong problem. Your perforated case solution was so elegantly simple it made our complex efforts look primitive." By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the M18 recoilless rifle had proven that pragmatic engineering combined with industrial capacity could produce weapons that did not merely match enemy systems, but completely transcended them, turning the once feared Panzerfaust into a symbol of technological obsolescence and demonstrating that in modern warfare, the outcome is often decided by production, physics, and the ability to field superior systems, not by individual heroism alone.